In a crisis, having the right tools or equipment can make all the difference in the world. Today, I'm showing you compact, miniature stoves that could be a lifesaver in a grid-down scenario. We're going to dive into 10 of the best emergency, compact, miniature stoves that will keep you cooking indoors during crisis. I'll show you how well they perform, and I'll give you some tips for each one. And at the end of the video, I'll show you my favorite miniature stove and tell you why it's my favorite. Some of these stoves are made for cooking indoors. Some are made for cooking outdoors, but can safely be used indoors if you have the right safety equipment. And one of them is an outdoor only stove. I won't be heating a can of food, boiling water, and trying to do some simple frying on all 10 stoves. That would be 30 different cooking things, which would make a very long video. So I'm going to tell you how we're going to evaluate each of the 10 stoves. We're going to use this Snow Peak kettle. I'm going to put 2 cups of water in the kettle for each stove, and we'll see how long it will take each stove to boil 2 cups of water, or if it will boil 2 cups of water. The first stove is the Fire Dragon multi-fuel cooker. The ruler is so you can get a sense of the size of the stove. You guys have seen this stove in a few other videos. If you were using it outside, it has a windscreen and also carry fuel in it if you take it in your backpack or in your bug out bag. Fuel options: the stove manufacturer makes fuel for it, of course. And these are gel fuel cubes. You can also use a liquid gel fuel, like either of these will work. But for today, we're going to use the has a little compartment. Your Snow Peak kettle with 2 cups of water in it. Seven and a half minutes to reach a rolling boil with the Dragon stove with the Dragon stove gel fuel. That was the Dragon stove. Took 7 minutes and 30 seconds to reach a full rolling boil with 2 cups of water. The temperature on this stove is not adjustable. Once you start it, it's going to burn until it burns out of fuel. You can't add more fuel to it until it's out. And I did measure it, but my past experience is that those gel cubes that you saw will burn anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes. If any of you guys have experience using the Dragon stove, let the rest of us know what your experience has been. Do you like the stove or do you not like it? The next compact stove is a gel stove. This particular stove is made specifically to burn gel fuels in. It is a Trangia. It's just merely a small can. Put your fuel in and do your cooking. Fuel options would be any type of gel fuel, liquid-like gel fuel. And you could also use the Dragon stove fuel cubes. You could also use alcohol in this stove and make a do-it-yourself alcohol stove using rubbing alcohol. This stove is one of the stoves which you're going to have to make a makeshift grill or grate, you know, something to set your kettle or your skillet or your whatever over. For today, I'm going to use this stove, 2 cups of water in our Snow Peak kettle. gel fuel stove. Took somewhere between 12 minutes and 12.5 minutes to bring our 2 cups of water to a rolling boil. Unlike the Dragon stove, this one does have an on-off switch, kinda. You can use the lid as a snuffer. And it is out. The gel stove took 12 minutes to bring 2 cups of water to a rolling boil. And like the Dragon stove, the temperature is not adjustable, but it does kind of have an on and off switch. As you saw me do, you can turn it off, so to speak, by snuffing it out with the lid. Do any of you guys have experience with using a gel stove? The next stove is a type of alcohol stove. It has 2 smaller stoves that fit inside a folding stove, like a large Esbit type stove. You can use the stoves this way or this way. So today we're going to use both stoves at the same time with that configuration. Fuel options could be rubbing alcohol, the yellow heat bottles, or any type of alcohol that you would use in any other alcohol stove. But today we're going to be using the yellow heat, and so that we don't spill alcohol all over the place, I'm going to be using this fuel bottle. Our 2 cups of water. It appears that some of the alcohol or the flame is coming out around the edges of the lids. Therefore, it might be better to use this stove if you decide to use this one without the lids on them, because it looks like it's functioning that way anyway. This is the very first time that I've actually used this stove, so I had 0 experience with it, and that it's not functioning like I thought it would is reason that you need to use your stoves before the time comes, so that you don't have something happen you didn't expect, which in this case isn't that big a deal. However, it potentially could have been. So the 2-burner alcohol stove was a little bit disappointing. However, if you used it without the lids being on it, you would get the same results as what we got with the lids on it. So the good point of that stove is you can use 1 or 2 of those smaller stoves that come with it. You also get like a grate or a grill to set your kettle or your skillet on. A couple advantages of this stove, even though it didn't function real well with the lid on it, it did the job. It just, the lid didn't do what the lid is designed to do. Other than that, it still functioned very well. Some advantages: first of all, it's a folding pocket type stove like the Esbit stoves, which will allow you, among other things, to use any of the solid fuel tablets that these type stoves use. You can modify this easily to be like this by taking out the felt pads and the little screen. This then is like a miniature version of the sardine alcohol stove and will function very well with just rubbing alcohol. It will also work to use your gel stove in as a grate or grill. So it still has some good points. It took 6.5 minutes or a little more than that to bring 2 cups of water to a strong rolling boil. The temperature theoretically can be controlled by using the lids or not using the lids. You could use a snuffer to put those out. So it basically has a primitive on-off switch. So this stove was new to me. That was the very first time that I've ever used it. So if any of you guys have any experience with that particular stove or that type of stove, we would really like to hear about your experience down in the comments. Our next stove is a isobutane stove, one of the larger miniature stoves we're looking at. This one is from the GSI company, their Glacier camp stove. It's a very nice stove. I've used this several times camping. For a little more stability. The heat or temperature on this one is very controllable. We're going to use it about right there. That occurred at a little less than 4 minutes. Unlike the other stoves we've looked at, this one we just finished. Temperature control is excellent. It took a little over 3.5 minutes to get 2 cups of water to a very strong rolling boil. This stove works very well. It will allow you to heat foods, cook foods, make coffee, and you can also fry on it. But you got to be careful because it is kind of tall as far as stoves go, so you got to use the right size skillet if you decide to fry, and make sure that it won't tip over. But all in all, I really like this stove. Any of you guys had experience with this stove or a similar type of stove? If so, again, let us know what your experience was, good or bad, down in the comments. Our next stove is a very small isobutane stove, very small. For comparison, previous stove we just looked at. Fuel options for this stove are the same as the previous stove. Temperature, heat control is very good on this stove as well. Our 2 cups of water. Earlier in the video, I told you that you needed something for your hands. Here's an example of why. The handles on these type kettles and various types of cooking instruments, they get very hot. And if you tried to get that with your bare hand and it was hot, you might jerk away from it. If it were really hot, spill whatever's in there on someone, yourself. Could be very dangerous. So you definitely got to have a welding glove or some kind of a mitten when you're dealing with these alternative type stoves. The small isobutane stove, it took around 5 minutes or a little longer to boil our 2 cups of water. The temperature or heat is very adjustable. Like the previous stove, it has an on and off, but you do have to be careful with these about tipping or spilling the things that you're cooking, because the stoves, along with the fuel canisters, are pretty tall and less stable than some of the other stoves. There are adapters for the isobutane stoves that you can buy, like this, but I don't have one of those yet, so I haven't used the isobutane stoves on a propane canister yet. So we're halfway through the stoves, we've got 5 more to go. I want to remind you guys that all the stoves and the items that you see in the video, there are links to those down in the description box if you should decide that you want one of those or some of those. Our next stove is a butane stove, a very small butane stove. compared to a traditional regular sized butane stove. Fuel options for this stove, of course, is going to be butane, which attaches here. There's the opening. Like any other butane stoves. The heat or temperature is very adjustable. We're going to use it about right there. Our 2 cups of water. So far, with all the stoves we looked at, none have released any measurable amounts of carbon monoxide. So the miniature butane stove only has one fuel option, which is butane. The heat or temperature is very easily controlled. It does have an on and off switch. You can keep the flame going for an extended amount of time, not just a few minutes until you run out of gel fuel or alcohol. We didn't fry on it today, but like any of the other butane stoves, you would be able to fry on this little stove as well. You just couldn't use as large of a skillet, but you could still fry. Do any of you guys out there have experience with one of these miniature butane stoves? If so, let us hear about that experience down in the comments, good or bad. Our next stove is going to be an alcohol stove. And this one in particular is a Trangia. Fuel options for alcohol stoves would be any type or kind of alcohol that you would use in any of your alcohol stoves. For today, in this stove, we're going to be using the yellow heat. And since we're looking at miniature stoves, for the alcohol stove, we're going to also use a miniature kitchen. This is the Trangia 274 UL. It's a complete cooking system. You can heat, cook, boil, and fry. However, it burns very hot, very quickly. It is not temperature adjustable in my experience. Yes, theoretically it's possible. We will look at this miniature kitchen in a lot more detail in an upcoming video. Goes down in the hole. Two cups of water. So the alcohol stove took about 6 minutes to heat our 2 cups of water to a rolling boil. The heat or temperature adjustment is theoretically possible, but realistically not very likely. It does kind of have on and off with the snuffer. We did use a miniature kitchen also with our alcohol stove. You do not have to have miniature kitchen. You can use any number of types of grills or grates or stoves to use. If you have a more open type of setup, it will probably take 2-3 minutes longer to get 2 cups of water to boil. So I know a lot of you guys have experience with alcohol stoves. So for those folks who don't have that experience yet, let us know what your experience has been, good or bad. You like it, don't like them, down in the comments. Okay, we have 2 more stoves for indoors, and we're going to do them both at the same time because they are going to take quite a bit of time to heat and or boil the water. A Sterno type fuel canister, which is a fuel and stove in and of itself, and that is a very tiny alcohol stove. For the Sterno, we're going to use a Sterno type stove. This is a Rothko version. I just got this, haven't used it yet. And we'll get a setup going for the tiny, tiny alcohol stove as well. Of course, fuel options, the alcohol stove is any alcohol that you would use. And again, we're using the heat, yellow heat. The Sterno canister, the fuel is already in it, so it's going to be a Sterno type fuel. Two cups of water from the Snow Peak kettle, and 2 cups in a smaller kettle, but still 2 cups, over our tiny alcohol stove. So here we go. I did put a lid on it. Starting temperature of the water was right at 70 degrees. So at the 15-minute mark, the Sterno fuel has the water up to 160 degrees. So if you were only using this to heat canned food in 15 minutes or less, it would be too hot to eat. So after about 15 and a half minutes, the water here is about 105 degrees. The Sterno stove canister brought the 2 cups of water to a rolling boil somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 minutes, although it wasn't as strong a rolling boil as some of the other stoves. The temperature is not adjustable, but they do kind of have an on and off switch if you have a snuffer. The miniature alcohol stove, after 30 minutes, brought 2 cups of water up to 140 degrees, which would be good enough if you were just heating canned soup, canned chili, and so forth. Or if you were using a smaller amount of liquid, it would probably get to that temperature and a little higher in a little bit less time. Nevertheless, the miniature alcohol stove is more of a novelty or a toy, something to play around with to see if you can find a good use for it. Maybe a alcohol candle. The temperature on it is not adjustable. It does have on and off switch if you put a snuffer on it. The last of our 10 miniature stoves is an outdoor only stove. It's a small or miniature wood burning stove. So I'm going to get a fire started. I am going to use the fire starting gel because this is not a video about my fire making ability using bow drills, flint and steel, ferro rods and stuff. I'm going to use the modern bushcrafter's method, a lighter. And there are 2 cups of water, and it is a bit smoky. I did have to put more wood on it. Okay, so the wood burning stove, at the 12-minute mark, I did have boiling water, but I had to refuel it 2 times, I think. So the fuel options for that stove, obviously, is wood. And I'm wondering if any of you guys out there have any experience of using stoves like that one, perhaps a little bit bigger, using the wood pellets for pellet stoves. I'd really like to hear from you if you've got experience doing that. Temperature on this stove is not adjustable, other than if you don't keep the fuel in it, the fire goes out and the temperature goes way down. And even though it took me 12 minutes to get that rolling boil, if I stayed right on top of the fuel, didn't let it burn down much, it would have boiled the water a little quicker, I do believe. So all in all, the miniature wood burning stove works, but I wouldn't want to depend on it to boil water, fix food, and so forth. It may be fuel efficient, but it's very time consuming. Which one of these 10 stoves is right for you? Are any of them right for you? So these stoves that we just looked at, all of them will heat canned food. Most of them will boil water, with the possible exception of the tiny alcohol stove. Several of them will allow you to fry foods, as long as you got the right size skillet. So my favorite miniature stove, well, it used to be the alcohol stove, especially once I had the miniature kitchen to go with it. But now, after getting these stoves that you saw in the video and testing them out, my new favorite miniature stove is the miniature butane stove. I like it because it uses the full-size butane canister. It will allow me to heat, cook, and fry. I haven't had any problems or issues with it, but I haven't had it for very long. And if I should have a problem or an issue with it, I will certainly let you guys know, either in a video or in the community tab. Is there any of these stoves that you'd like to see me do a much more detailed video on, with heating, cooking, frying, potentially even baking? Any one of the stoves that you'd like to see a video on? And if so, which stove would that be? So safety measure number 1 is you got to be familiar with the stove and the fuel, which means before the time comes, you need to pick your stove out, use it, become very familiar with it. Number 2, you're going to need a flat, stable surface that's heat resistant for any of these types of stoves. Number 3, you're going to need something to protect your hands, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of hot stoves and items. And it becomes very important when you're using these alternative stoves, because you don't want to get burnt and jerk your hand quickly, knock a stove over, have a fire. And item number 4, in the event that that does happen, you need a fire blanket, or item 5, a fire extinguisher. And item 6, really, is you need both of those. And item 7 is a carbon monoxide detector. If you use any kind of alternative fuels indoors, one of these stoves, one of the fuels with these stoves, or anything else, you have to have the carbon monoxide detector. In the event you use something that gives off carbon monoxide, there's no fire blanket that will help you, no fire extinguisher that will help you. You got to have that.